my approach to covering the White House was my approach to covering every story. That is, get up early, stay late, head down, tail up, work hard, call people, knock on doors, wear out shoe leather, and try to find out what's going on. Whether the Democrat, Republican, mugwump, or what have you, that's the way you do it. And with the Nixon presidency, I say, I thought it was a breath of fresh air. I welcomed a new presidency, hoping the best for the country. Even after it became very apparent that what they had told me, we know who you are and what you are and all of that, I just said, listen, I'll prove it to them. They will see. They won't always like what I'm going to put on the air, but they will see that accuracy and fairness, I won't give you the journalism creed, but that's the way I am, and I'll win them over, at least to thinking that I'd give them a fair shake. They began to seal off information from in the White House. That is, you make telephone calls. In those days, I was well known, I think, for I'd try to make at least 50 telephone calls a day. As a reporter, sometimes a short, well, you know, Joe, don't know anything. Thank you very much. Call you tomorrow. I'll call you next week, what have you. But it's very important for the White House correspondent to be able to reach people inside the White House. And I tried. For a long time, I couldn't get anybody on the phone. Once in a while, get somebody on the phone. Dr. Henry Kissinger was a notable exception. Heavens knows I was not one of his favorites, and he wasn't a very good source, but he would take calls from time to time, but not often. But at any rate, here's the point, that they, and as part of their aggressiveness, they not only wouldn't take calls, wouldn't give you anything inside, but then accuse you of not calling them. This is part of the, bump them hard. Now, any reporter worth his salt, and there were many reporters who were in basically the same situation that I was, what you do is you say, well, if they aren't going to tell me in the White House what's going on, then I have to find other ways. So I began to rededicate myself to developing sources in the Defense Department. I'd been in Vietnam. Some of the guys who were captains were now colonels, light colonels. Go to Capitol Hill. We had a great correspondent at Capitol Hill, and Roger Mudd, and I didn't report from Capitol Hill, but make contact because the Nixon people felt that they had such control of the whole apparatus, of the whole political apparatus, that if they didn't want you to know something, you weren't going to know it. Well, that spoke to their misunderstanding of the press, in particular the Washington press, because there's so many people who know so much in Washington. It's not what you know, it's who you know that knows, that you can contact. So begin to develop these outside sources, outside the White House, which John Ehrlichman in particular, he was one of the big two. Haldeman and Ehrlichman were the two major domos around President Nixon for a long while, with Dr. Kissinger for foreign policy. John Ehrlichman in particular, he told me so, I began to frustrate them and anger them. Then on the one hand, he'd say, you don't call us. I said, well, listen, I called 20 times over a period of 15 days, and I finally got the message, And he said, well, you're wrong a lot of the time. And once he said to me, he said, it's people. I said, what's wrong? He said, well, people believe you, and they shouldn't believe you. Mm-hmm. I said, well, in my business, if I'm wrong very often, people are not going to believe me. So if people believe me, we had that conversation. The point being is they couldn't seal it off. And my hope was, and to a degree, when I say it worked, to a degree, I'd find out things and, leave a message call and say, well, I recognize Mr. So-and-so is not in today as he hasn't been for the last 5 days, but let me tell you, on the CBS Evening News tonight, I'm going to report so-and-so, having developed it from sources someplace else, and if he wants to have something to say about that or put his oar in, he should call me back. And from time to time, they would call back. I want to emphasize, I'm not the only reporter to whom this happened. And I wasn't the best reporter at the White House. That everybody had their own ways. But that gives you some feel for the first Richard Nixon administration, 1968 to 72. Watergate was not on the front page. Nobody really knew about it at that point.